this is my basement, not my room, because again, it's a game episode. I'm going to be talking about some rare, obscure video game system instead of movies or books, which shall be filmed in my room in further episodes. Now, to get some things out of the way, the Fighting Vipers review is going to be delayed because, in fact, this is just for the special occasion because I had to do this. One of my friends donated this to me to review. The Turbografix 16. Now, a lot of people may be wondering, well, what's the Turbografx 16? Well, it was part of the 4th generation of gaming, which a lot of people don't know is the 16-bit generation of gaming. There were systems such as the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis were the two most popular systems at the time, but this was the first one to be released. Now, before I start talking more about the system, I have this to say. What kind of a fucking shape is this? I mean, look at this thing. This is the weirdest shape I have ever seen for a video game system. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, it's a rectangle with another rectangle on it. Yeah, but it's still really weird. I mean, it has one of the most clunkiest shapes I've ever seen on a video game system. So anyway, besides the clunky look of this system, let's give a little history. Now in Japan, this thing was called the PC Engine, and it had a better shape. It kind of looked like Nintendo's Famicom, which was the Japan version of the NES. It was more of a smaller and more compact system, pretty easy. But I think this was the Japanese big FU to us by giving us this big clunky-like system. In fact, the NES was unnecessarily big too and had a lot of mechanical problems, and the Famicom was actually pretty small and didn't have a lot of breakdowns, at least that's what I hear. So the Japanese kind of screwed us over with these kind of systems. Maybe it's kind of to get back at us for Hiroshima, but I don't know. So anyway, the Turbografx 16, again, like I said, it was called the PC Engine in Japan. It was the first of the 4th generation of gaming, but it did not really do that well in North America. Now, I'm just saying it did not do well in North America, because that is a fact. Because on my Sega Saturn hardware review, one guy wrote that, well, there's always underground tournaments. And I'm saying, yeah, but at the time, the system really wasn't that great. Nowadays, it's considered it's considered nostalgic value. It's like a classic. These old systems, a lot of people will break their backs to get. Now, unfortunately, I got this for free, so. Now, much like I did with my Sega Saturn review, I'm gonna compare all the systems to each other, their controllers, their outputs, and of course, the look of the system. Let's first take a look at my favorite system of all time, the Super Nintendo. Da-da-da-da. Now I know this was the last one to come out in the 4th generation of gaming, or the 16-bit era, and they had a little time to work on some of the things to make it look like a good system. But to be honest, it does have a definite shape. It doesn't look it looks a little childish, but it still looks like a very mature system. There's, of course, the power switch, there's the eject button for the cartridges, great cartridge slip, reset button. Overall, it doesn't look too bad. It's not laughable, and it honestly is a better looking system than the NES, and it looks about the same as the Japan system, the Super Famicom. Overall, this one's a really good looking system. Now let's move on to the Genesis. Now this is a Model 2 Genesis, so I don't want to get any shit for not mentioning, oh, where's your Model 1 Genesis? Well, I don't have one, so shut up. Now I know this one came out a lot later, but again, it almost has the exact same shape, just there's not a lot of stuff over here. They kind of compacted it into one. But again, it's a good looking system. It's pretty much just a square, which is good. Got the cartridge ports, the power button, reset button, and overall it just looks very presentable. It doesn't look too bad. Now I know with all the add-ons like the 32X and the Sega CD it looked like a piece of shit, but by itself this system does not look bad. Now here we go with the Turbografx. It's a huge rectangle, which of course isn't really good for storage space, especially on this shelf. It just looks out of place and it just looks ridiculous. And then you got that back part right here. I guess the Turbografx got back. Baby got back. Yeah, whatever. So it looks really out of place and really stupid. And I know it's for the CD add-on, but they honestly could have just kind of like slid it in a little more. Now, another thing I gotta mention on the system are the control ports. At the time, there weren't a lot of 4-player games for consoles because of the because of the, there just wasn't. So these have 2 controller ports. A standard for system, although 4 controller ports would have been good. It was unheard of at the time. The Sega Genesis has 2, typical, whatever. But the Turbografx only has 1. One controller port. Now I know there is an add-on feature, much like how the PlayStation screwed us over, where you get... Where is that thing? Now I know there's this that you can buy with the system that has 5 controller ports, but give me a break. First of all, who's ever heard of a 5-player game? And second, did they even make 5-player games for the Turbo 16? No, I do not think so. So why didn't the standard system just come with 2 controller ports? Or if they were really going to make 5-player games, look it. There is enough freaking room on the system for 5 controller ports. Now I know Retro Gamer already commented on this, but give me a fucking break. Like, seriously? There's, like, you only have 1, which is just, like, right there. It's kind of like by itself chilling over there. And then you have none over here. Oh, and no reset button either. Like Retro Gamer said, there's no reset button, which I guess you don't need to have, but it just makes a lot of things more convenient. Like, oh, the game's not working. I better, reset the button instead of going, like this. It just would have been convenient. And then, of course, there's no dust cleaner on the system either, but then again, this wasn't a cartridge-based system. But we'll get to that in a little while. Now let's take a look at the controllers. Okay, so now it's time to compare the controllers. Again, the Super Nintendo is probably my favorite of the controllers. It kind of borrowed a little similar of the Genesis controllers, but get this, there's 4 buttons, just in case a game is really complicated and requires more buttons for more actions, which really does work, especially in games like Super Metroid and Street Fighter. You can definitely use a lot of these controls, and of course the infamous Batman Forever, where you have to hold down, and select. And again, look, start, select, appropriate titles for the buttons, and overall, it just looks really nice too. And it has that good grip feeling, and improved upon the NES instead of that kind of box feel. It has that nice circular feel for your hands. The Genesis is a pretty decent controller too. The shape is more memorable than I think the actual control. Only problem, there's only a start button, and then there's 3 buttons instead of 4, which I know this came out way before the Super Nintendo, but I don't know. I know there's special edition Genesis controllers, but I do wish they would have at least included a select button. Overall, this controller is not that bad either. And again, it has a good grip on it, so it doesn't really hurt, so you don't have a box poking your hand all the time. Again, a pretty decent controller and a classic controller. Now, I'm not going to hate on the Turbografx 16 controller, but again, it has those kind of, not rough edges, but similar to the NES controller edges that kind of like poke your finger. The D-pad feels a little stiff, and I don't get why it's called the run button instead of start. I mean, even Xbox controllers now, they call it the start button. Why would you call it the run button? That makes no sense. Like, do I gotta press it to make my character run? Why is it stopping? That's the opposite of running. And I don't get these switches right here. I'm not a huge Turbografx geek, so I'm not sure about these switches. I don't get what they do. Is it like the special editions of the Genesis controller that make the character go faster or make the buttons more powerful? I don't get it. And 1 and 2, kind of lame names for buttons. And I mean, I know A and B aren't the most original, and triangle and X aren't, but these just seem really lame buttons. But overall, the controller is a standard controller. But again, there's only 2 buttons, which means the games for the 16-bit era were a bit more complicated, so they probably needed more buttons instead of just jump and attack. But I don't get what these switches do. I'm not really sure, so please, no hate mail. I'm just sort of confused. Leave an appropriate comment, because I'm not sure what these switches do. But overall, it's not a bad, like I said, not a bad controller, but it's still a little weird. Another thing that kind of sucks about this system, well, all 3 systems suck because of this, are their huge-ass AC adapters. Like, seriously, this is really, really big. I mean, look at this thing. But the one thing I think sticks out the most about this is that this is white. And I know it seems weird, but the other AC adapters were black, and I just don't get why this one has to be white. Plus, it feels a lot more heavier than a Super Nintendo or Genesis one. It's just really big, and I just don't get why
It's so necessary. It's just really huge. I don't know. I've always hated these big-ass AC adapters. They just don't feel right. But all systems are guilty of it, so I'm not going to compare and contrast. All systems are fuck-ups for doing this, so fuck these huge AC adapters. They suck and need to go away. One more thing to talk about is, of course, what the games are on themselves. The cartridges. Well, I don't know what you call this. I know it's like a diskette or like a little card or something, but here. Let's compare the cartridge for Super Nintendo. It's big, it's clunky, and to be honest, it's not necessary. A lot of gamers have told me that, they didn't really need all this hunk of plastic for the game. It really was just for show. And although these cartridges are classic looking, I do think it's a bit unnecessary. However, if you put it in the game and you wanted to get it out, you don't have to just yank on it. And it comes out even if you yank on it. There's an eject button. So it really is a good way to have your system for such a big cartridge. It's a good thing to have that, eject button and the yanking button and all that other great shit. The Genesis is a really huge inconvenience. Okay, first of all, it takes a little while to stick in, and sometimes it won't be sticking out right, it won't be in right, so your game will have trouble starting off, and it's sometimes a bitch to get out. I mean, I don't know, it just feels really hard to get out, especially if you don't have two hands on it. And I know people might think I'm stupid, but it honestly is hard, especially holding a camera. It's hard to get it out with one hand. But honestly, what the Turbografx wins is the units that their games are on. These are really convenient because you don't need all this plastic surrounding a little microchip. This actually makes a lot more sense to have it on these little cards. All you gotta do is just slide it in, and your game is started. It honestly works a lot better. But to get it out, it's a bit of a pull, but not really. I mean, this honestly, I think, is a smarter idea than these big-ass cartridges. Now, I know a lot of people say, yeah, but it's classic, and it makes the game stick out more. Yeah, but these make it more convenient, and it saves money on, plastic. It honestly makes it a lot better that these are on cards. Plus, it just looks cooler, like, oh, I gotta play a game, just gotta slide my card in. It makes it sound sly and sexy. I don't know. I find this to be really cool. I like how these are on cards versus these big old chunks of plastic that just are surrounding a little microchip. So, I like the cards. So, yeah, I'm going to stick with these. I think this was a really smart idea. Even though these are still classic looking, they're really unnecessary. I mean, they really are just a bunch of fucking plastic surrounding a little microchip.
Now that we've talked about the hardware of the Turbografx 16, now it's time to look at some games. But to be honest, I like to question this system's name, the Turbografx 16. Because, to be honest, I'm a bit disappointed when I play these games. Now, I know graphics aren't everything in games, but I just want to give you a little look at, just a little see-through of what these games look like. Because to be honest, they don't really look 16-bit.
Here's an example of a game called Bonk's Adventure, probably the most popular title on the Turbografx 16. It's a pretty decent game, whatever, I'll critique it later, but something I wanted to point out. I mean, look at the graphics. They really don't look 16-bit. Now, I am impressed by the volcanoes in the background. Most of the scenery doesn't look too bad, but it doesn't really look 16-bit. I mean, it kind of looks like a combination between an 8-bit game, maybe like a 10-bit game, but definitely not a 16-bit game. Here's another example of a game called JJ and Jeff. Now, I'm going to talk about this game later, like Bonk's Adventure, but again, look at the graphics. Now, I know games aren't supposed to be perfect and everything, but jeez, they don't really look inspiring or that great. I mean, compared to another game such as X-Men for the Super Nintendo. I mean, look at these graphics. Not only is there more attention to detail, but there's things going on in the background. It's not all blank. Yeah, I mean, Bonk's Adventure and JJ Jeff had impressive screen titles, but this just looks a lot better compared, and it's 16-bit. I think there's something missing here. And then when you look back on this game, it just looks really disappointing compared to other 16-bit games at the time. It's an epic fail.
But what could the problem be? I mean, it says the Turbografx 16, shouldn't the graphics be 16-bit? Now, here's why. Because in Japan it's called the PC engine, so there's no misleading titles or anything, it's just, oh, the PC engine, it could mean anything. But with a system called the Turbografx 16, you kind of expect it to have I don't know, 16-bit graphics. Now, I know it was the first one released in North America, but I honestly think they marketed it wrong. Why? Because they're trying to sell the word 16-bit. That's why. Now, I know a lot of people might say that's a bad assumption to make, that, oh, that's not credible, that's not stupid, where are you getting your sources for that? But I honestly think that's what it is. I mean, what else could it be? I mean, I know they're obviously lying to us. And again, I think it was Japan's joke on North America to release the Turbografx 16. Because there was a game for the Turbografx 16 that was quite popular, and its American counterpart was butchered on the Super Nintendo. I'm of course talking about Castlevania Dracula X Rondo of Blood. Yeah, I know it's a stupid title, but what are you going to say about the Japanese? I mean, they have some bizarre titles. Ever seen a Godzilla title? Now, before I get started on that, the point is that the games don't look 16-bit. But are they fun? Well, we're going to have to find that out next time when I talk about the Turbografx 16 games. Now, I'm not going to review all of these games, but I will pick a couple of them to review. Ones that I think are worthy to talk about. There's some popular titles, some unpopular titles, but hey, there's not that many Turbografx 16 games around. I mean, I know there's some used game stores that sell some, but I'm just saying that there's not a shitload of games, but I do have a couple. So join me next time when I talk about a selected Turbografx 16 games, and we talk more about this system. Till then, I'm B-Bake saying, yeah, what I usually say.